Today, I will bring to you my most unpopular opinion ever. I don't think anybody will agree with me, but I'm going to state it anyways. I've just started a new movement called MUGA. Make us, the United States of America, great again. And through MUGA, I do recommend that before we try to break up all of our biggest companies, that maybe we should think twice about it first. What do I mean by this? The FTC has antitrust proceedings or lawsuits already brought against Alphabet, Meta, Apple, Microsoft, and Amazon. Some of these companies are leading the way on the absolute frontier of technology right now. Quantum and AI, you could say Amazon, Meta, Alphabet, Microsoft, tremendous players. However, America, for whatever reason, left and right, love to use them as scapegoats. And rightly so for some things. I'm not saying it's all roses with these companies. But we should make sure before we try to break them up that we have non-biased and competent adjudicators bringing lawsuits against them. That's not simply a matter of payoffs, political preference, and a ruling class in the courts or juries that do not understand the issues being brought forth to them. Let me just give you a quick example. Epic Games, maker of Fortnite, which if you're young, I'm sure you've played, had an issue with Android and Apple's app stores, and that they both require a 30% payment. Now, Epic Games released an alternate payment system within their own app. And so what I mean by that is that whenever you make a transaction in these apps released through their app store, you have to pay Google or you have to pay Apple a 30% gatekeeper fee. And Epic did not like that because obviously 30% is a lot of money. And so they released alternate payment systems. And these payment systems got the app banned in both app stores, and Epic took them to court. Now, here is the crazy part. In Epic versus Apple, Epic argued that Apple, as a closed garden, walled garden, they are closed ecosystem. They are. They'll admit it. That's their model. And what that means is that in iOS, you cannot legally distribute an app outside of the App Store. It is illegal to do such. So Epic must use the iOS App Store to release a native app onto iPhones. And when they do this, they have to pay 30% of whatever transactions happen through the app or in the sale of that app to Apple. And understand the closed part is, again, there is no other method. They could release something on the web, but that's not a native app. That's limited by what the capabilities of the web browser are, which in the closed Apple ecosystem, they keep that browser, Safari, they purposely keep it on their phones well behind current technologies so that people are forced to go through their app stores and they can make that money. This is well known. I know there are tons of Apple fanboys out there, but you can look this all up. This is extremely well known. And in this case, it was heard before a judge. And what happened was that the judge found Apple clear on 9 of 10 charges. The only thing that they found is that Apple is so closed that they even said that in the app, I can't steer them outside of the app to pay for stuff. And steering is like if I release an app and I say, hey, you want to buy this item go onto your PC or go onto your web browser and purchase it there, and we'll offer you a 20% discount, which is still a 10% win for Epic. And Apple said, nope, you can't do that either. You can't even let them know. There's no way to go outside of your app. If you have any information to let them know, we're so closed that if you even let them know, we're going to ban you. So they lost on that. But on everything else, they won. They were found to be not anti-competitive, which to me is actually pretty mind-boggling, since they control a majority of the market. They control 55% of in-app mobile payments in America. Now, both companies had taken extremes in their defense and offense, because you got to look at the market. And Apple said that the market includes all gaming devices: Switch, Xbox, web browsers, computers, Android. And so in that, they don't have a majority. Epic said that's just iPhone, since nobody else can release on the iPhone. The court found that it should be mobile devices. And I personally agree with that. I think that's actually a good, I think that's a fair ruling there. However, the court looked at the Sherman Act and said that just because you're successful doesn't mean you're a monopolist. You have to be anti-competitive. And didn't find that they were anti-competitive, which to me was actually kind of mind-boggling, because they are not allowing any competition on their platform, which seems like it would be anti-competitiveness. But Apple has successfully argued to the court that through privacy concerns, they were only doing this for the benefit of the consumer. The only reason that they couldn't allow apps to come from someone else is because of privacy. And the court bought that. So Apple only has your best interest in mind to limit competition. And the court actually bought that to the Ninth Circuit Court, and the Supreme Court denied to hear it. Mind-blowing. Epic brought the same lawsuit against Google. And now, mind you, Google operates on an open system, which means that technically anybody can release an app store on their phones. In fact, the majority of Android phones come with the second app system from Samsung. It's called the Galaxy Store. And the Samsung devices are the majority of Android phones sold in America. So Google doesn't even have a monopoly on the App Store. They have an alternate App Store that's on the majority of devices, the Galaxy Store. Not only that, if Apple's in the mobile space, then Google is also in the mobile space, right? They're both mobile phones. And Apple's actually the leader in that space. They take 55% of payments. Google takes 45%. So you could say Google's a minority there. They're not even a majority. And you don't even have to go through an app store in Android. And Epic did this. You can sideload apps onto Android. And it's not illegal. It's illegal on an Apple device, but it's not on an Android. So hearing all this on the surface, you might be like, this doesn't make any sense, because you know I'm going to say Google lost, which they did. Why would they lose? Well, one, it was brought before a jury. And so you have a case where the judge didn't understand the BS that Apple was feeding it about privacy. She totally bought the line. Can you imagine? I mean, just imagine like Richard Stallman or any, open source privacy guru being at this and just hearing these words. They would just be like, oh my gosh, right? It's unbelievable. But anyways, neither here or there. But Google was heard before a jury. And Epic knew that a jury is you can manipulate them in different ways. And so what they said is that Google has anti-competitive behavior. So they said, oh yeah, you're open, But you do some anti-competitive things, such as they have paid some manufacturers not to release app stores. And just because they did that, they ended up losing this lawsuit, which is absolutely crazy. Because again, they're not even the majority of the market. Again, they're not even the majority on their phones. Well, they're the majority, but they're not like a huge majority. Their Samsung Galaxy store is on every Galaxy phone. It's heavily used. You have alternate methods to distribute apps on Google. 100%, you can distribute it any way you want. But because Google competed in some anti-competitive behavior, i.e., paid a few companies to not release app stores on their phones. I forgot what companies it was. I think LG was one of them. Epic was able to point to that and say to the jury, see, and remember, whoever this was that I believe is LG, their percent of the market would have been like 5%. Epic was able to say, see, anti-competitive. And the jury bought it. Absolutely ridiculous, right? And this shows the ineptness of our court system when it comes to technology. That people don't understand, the judges don't understand. Sometimes they get some things right, but most of the stuff they're going to get wrong because they cannot understand the complexities of it. And the funny thing is that Epic's CEO, he even said as much. I'm going to paraphrase him, but he basically said that in a way it's a travesty that Alphabet lost instead of Apple. But that by being before a jury, their strategy could change and gave them more of a shot. He pretty much, I'm paraphrasing him because I don't have the quote before that, but right, he was really upset with Apple because they were already sideloading onto Android devices, already getting a lot of money through that. It was Apple they were really targeting hard, but they were hoping to open it up for everything. And so Apple somehow still remains close to them in a device where they already were receiving a lot of money because they were releasing it. That's the device that got punished. Okay, so I bring that up as an example, a very crystal clear example of how poorly our court systems can act on this. Now, the FTC is suing Facebook, and as their competitor in their competitive landscape for Meta, they are listing a company called Me2, which is a social network in America. And if you haven't heard of it, don't worry. Nobody has because nobody uses it. And they have Me2 and Snapchat defined as the competitors to Meta's products. Okay? They don't have X, which has 300 million people. They don't have YouTube, right? Instagram, YouTube, even Facebook with videos, which has over 2 billion people, right? They have the most obscure companies that no one's ever heard of. And you know, because of the biases versus Meta, and because everything is political nowadays, which is also why I think the judge ruled for Apple. I think it was a lack of competence, but I also think it was the Apple cult mentality. I really do. I'm sure the judge was an iPhone user. She was a fairly liberal judge, and a lot of liberals are an Apple cult, even though they don't want to admit it. They still have cult. Everybody has cult mindset to some degree. It's something we need to try to scrub out of our brain, but it's just that remnants of instinct from way back, in the day. 3 billion years of evolution, as it can't be completely wiped out. So here you have the United States government defining a market just absolutely ridiculously, going after Meta. Same thing happened with Alphabet. Just the other day, they were found anti-competitive in the state's lawsuits. Now, I want you to understand that the reason the state started this lawsuit was over 12 years ago. And it was well reported that back in the day when Google had like links to illegal music to download, MP3s and such, obviously these companies got very upset and they went to the states to complain and try to go after Google. And so they would funnel money into certain races. They bought influence, Republican or Democratic lawmakers, and pressured them into bringing these lawsuits. And yesterday we saw the fruition of all these other interests, their money, work as another anti-competitive ruling came against Google, which, if you look at it, was absolutely ridiculous. And here's one thing I want to tell you about Alphabet. You can look at Tesla and say that was funded by taxpayer dollars, which it was. The only reason Tesla's around is because of EV credits and the carbon credits. So it's funded by government programs. Same thing with SpaceX, 100% funded by us. But not Alphabet, not Meta. You can't say that. You can't say, oh, hey, these guys were funded by my tax dollar. They weren't. They went out and they competed in an open market. And they provided the best services and they won. Apple largely too. These are companies that are not going out and exploiting corporate welfare. Now, in the sense that they probably have the best accountants and aren't paying their taxes, like maybe they should, but the simple fact is they pay it within the law. Depends on what you call corporate welfare, but they're not like Tesla, i.e. getting literal credits from the government, and these credits are a majority of their income to keep them in business. That's not happening. And we're looking at these companies and we want to break them up from a competitive standpoint because they have what? They've outcompeted people. So in an earlier lawsuit against Google, it was found that Google might have to divest Chrome. Now, if you don't know anything about Chrome, it's an open source browser. So you can go get Chrome on the internet for free. You don't have to pay anything. And if you're a developer, you can go to the open source project that powers it called Chromium, and you can release your own version of this browser for free. Excuse me. And Microsoft actually has done this. So Microsoft's latest browser, I think it's called Edge. Sorry, I don't use it. They're Chromium based. They're based off of the open source Google project for Chrome. They contribute a lot of code to it. And the government is saying you might have to divest Chrome and never make a browser for 5 years. How is that going to help anybody? Okay, people willingly choose Chrome. Okay, it's not the default on Windows. It's not the default on Mac OS. It's not the default on iOS. Yes, it's the default on Google Pixel phones and a lot of Androids, but even Samsung had their own internet browser as the default, and Chrome was just a secondary one. And they weren't charging. It's not charged for it. They don't make money directly off of it. So they're forcing them to give away an open source product and saying that you can't even build in this space. When they're building this, took the internet out of the dark ages. The reason the internet is so good right now when it comes to web apps is, without a doubt, Chrome. You can pretend it's Firefox, Mozilla, etc. No, it is Chrome. If it wasn't for Chrome, we would be stuck in absolute jank and madness. Okay, simply put. Up until Chrome, everything else was closed source controlled by one company. Then came along Netscape, Mozilla, they opened it up, right? But then Chrome came along. And not only did they open it up, but they brought performance standards to all new levels. And so what would divesting them from it do? It would put it into the hands of somebody like, I don't know, they probably wouldn't let go to Microsoft. But let's imagine they did. Whoever's going to get it, what are they going to do? They're going to stop supporting Chromium as much as possible because Google can afford to do that. You see, Google's model is different. Google's model is built on you being online. Google wants you online, which is why they give away so much stuff for free. But they don't force you to use anything. I don't know if you know this, but you don't have to use Chrome. You don't have to use Google Search. You don't have to use Gmail. There are other alternatives to this. But Google provides extraordinary services. They provide them for free because they make their money off of people being online. That's how they make a lot of their money, just in general. But that is a model that only works on scale, tremendous scale. And probably nobody else on earth besides Meta, possibly Apple, not even Microsoft, have the scale that they could do that successfully. And they also just don't have it in their DNA, though Microsoft has been making a large commitment to open source. So imagine that they lose Chrome. Who does that benefit? Nobody. And whoever gets it, I will tell you right now that they're not going to put the millions of dollars that Google does, tens of millions, probably hundreds of millions of dollars, into supporting the Chromium open source project. I'm not saying every year, but over its lifetime that Google has. They're probably going to stop supporting it as much and really just start focusing on the proprietary aspects of it for their own product, which will benefit who? Nobody. Because it has been proven without a doubt every time in every area of technology that open source competition helps drive proprietary technology and the larger community to be the best it possibly could be. Yes, once again, MUGA, make us great again, make the U.S. great again. MUGA principles of free market capitalism are at work, and they work. Having a lot of competitors competing at the highest level is beneficial to the consumer. But the U.S. government doesn't want that. For whatever reason, they want to punish Google. Probably all political reasons. And again, they're hated by the right and left. Everybody hates the big tech companies. It's just a popular thing to do. They just want to punish them. Josh Hawley wants to get out there and point his finger, be mad, yell, right? Because that gets his constituents all riled up. People just want to be angry. They don't know what they want to be angry about. They just want to be angry. They also said possibly to divest from Android. Another open source project, which Amazon takes and releases into their devices, which many Chinese OEMs take and release into their devices, which Huawei did until we forced them not to, and now they developed their own. That's another matter. Okay, Android's open source. You and I can go right now. We can start a company. We can release an Android device off of the Android open source code. And Google doesn't have anything to say about it. And if we wanted to, we can fork it off from them forever and maintain it 100% on our own. Now, would we have the money and capability to do that? Probably not. But we could. Zuckerberg does. That's how he built his headset that my son uses, the Meta Quest 3. It's based on Android. And Google's been like, hey, Zuck, let's loop you back in. Let's do some stuff together. Bring you back over to our steered version. And Zuck's like, well, they discussed it. Ended up saying no. He's just building it straight off the open source version. They're maintaining it. So how does them owning this? What is the problem with them owning it? If And understand when I say they own it, it's not like you think you might say, wait, it's open source. Well, they're steering this project in some sense. They have the largest contributors, okay? And they don't own the open source project. It's code that's there that anybody can go and they can access. They do include some modules for their phones that make it easier for people to use. And if you're going to use those, a lot of those are proprietary. Well, what would forcing them to divest from it, saying you can't develop into this anymore, how would that benefit Android at all? Right? If Google had to remove all their developers, how would that benefit them? It wouldn't. Or sorry, benefit the system. It wouldn't. It wouldn't benefit anybody. In fact, it would strengthen Harmony OS. It would make iOS more of a monopoly in America. It wouldn't strengthen anything. So these are things when we're looking at these companies where we got to be awful careful. Just think about Microsoft and the idea that they're saying that it's so hard to move off of Windows projects to develop code for open source, and that's a form of lock-in. When you make your choice to develop a Windows app, you have locked yourself in. Okay? Why is Microsoft responsible for that? You have made the choice. You have locked yourself in. I don't know what's going to happen because in these cases, it's always the opposite of what you think. So we have right now, what are they? 5 of the largest 8 or 9 companies on earth. Again, Microsoft, Meta, Alphabet, huge players in AI. Meta open sourcing their AI. Alphabet releasing a lot of open source versions. Also has a proprietary version. Microsoft, heavy investor in OpenAI, which is not open. On the quantum, we have Microsoft, Google combating in that space. 2 of the most important technologies, 2 technologies that are literally going to be like fire, the invention of fire, if they realize, if they can recognize their true potential. And we want to say to these companies, no, let somebody else outside of America take the lead on this. We're going to break you up, strip you of your power. That's not making America great again, is it? For MAGA it is, because, I don't know, they've been programmed, but it's definitely not MUGA. Make us, the U.S., great again. That's what I got for you guys today. If you like this type of content, please hit the like and subscribe button down below. If you don't like it, please let me know why. Have a great day, everyone.